I got this thing licked. I have posed the question before, knowing I didn't have the answer. What is it that stops you from having the urge, the will, the motivation to work on your project? Well, I figured it out. Where this Range Rover is concerned, I knew looking at it some time back, some months back, that I hadn't repaired some aspects of the car the way I thought I'd be able to do them. Whether it was my skill, my facilities, whatever. There were just things on the car that I didn't like, and it stopped me in my tracks. Well, it took 2 days of thinking about coming back out to work on it, and then 2 more days of being out here achieving almost nothing for the motivation to come back, to get over that kind of hump job and to get ahead. But the motivation is back, and you are about to see I have gone into areas of this car that I had already repaired and spent quite a bit of time and effort on, and I've ripped them out and done them again. They may not be prettier than they were before, but they're definitely better. So anyway, here it is. Cast your mind back. This is October. The leaves are still on the trees and the sun is still relatively high in the sky, but motivation was low. And all that was really left to do, or the next job at least, was to start prepping all of the body that we had repaired for paint. These are the final legs of this build, and I got under the car to start preparing the boot underfloor using a heat gun to soften the underseal. And that is as far as I got. For some reason, I just downed tools. Now the Esprit was something to do with that, because we made the move to the body shop. But skip all the way through autumn, into the depths of winter, and a couple of storms later, things are not looking good. For starters, the cover that was old in the first place took a severe beating and is clinging to life, aided by some tie downs. And here and there where there's bare metal poking through it, yeah, you can see the car has been rusting. And this light surface rust, while light, is everywhere. Not the greatest thing you could see when you're trying to stoke up some new motivation. But I'm on a mission now. This car needs to be done. So let's go and see how that panel survived 2 months stark naked through Irish winter. Not great. If you can bear to look at it, this is the underside of our new boot floor rails, and I'm wire brushing everything and then hitting it with a rust converter in the hope that that will be enough before primer to arrest this rust and to save the work, all of those hours that we put into this. Now this converter, it's made by Loctite, and I'm using the remains of that wire brush that I used to take the adhesive off the bulkhead and the interior of the Esprit. And it's amazing how often that tool that has worn down or you've had to make for another job comes in really handy. I couldn't have done sections of this hard to reach places without this brush being worn down to the extent it is. And I've gone literally over the whole car anywhere I could see rust and hit it with the wire brush and then the rust converter. Now you're supposed to paint straight over this. They say key it up, but it's incredibly chalky, this stuff. I think that's kind of a silly thing to suggest you do. If you touch this with any kind of sandpaper, wire brush or anything abrasive, you're just taking it off. It's pure chalk. So key it up isn't much of a description in terms of a direction. It should really be just sand it back off. Now, the reason why in this section it doesn't look like it's done much is because I essentially cleaned the brush on this. It was the end of a day, and I have now found that you need to use this stuff quite generously to get it to work. I wire brushed everything again and then hit it with this paint on, off the shelf, nice thick grey primer. Now you probably noticed the underseal coming off the undersides of these wheel arches. It was a pain in the neck, but look at the wheel arches. The underseal really did do a good job where it did a good job. I mean, it's not good for nothing. And it was very difficult. It was a proper old slog getting it off. Again, using that heat gun, and the stiff scraper that is fast becoming a veteran of the toolbox. On the near side, that underfloor panel, I had primed it with a spray can to keep the air off it, and that really did work. Way better than a bare panel anyway. But wire brushing that old primer off was a bit of a bitch. Now you see the bolt protruding on the panel. I can't remember if it's for an earth or for a bracket, but either way, the very end of it sheared when I was trying to get the nut off it, so I'm going to replace it. And what am I going to replace it with? One of those stainless bolts that were used to sandwich the floor in the front footwells that are going to feature more and more as we put this car back together. And this is not very pretty, but it's got the length the original bolt would have had, and it's stainless now. And we're ready to prime. The whole underside of the rear end of the car is now in primer. It needs a second coat, but this was a big mojo builder. And I looked to other little jobs. The first one was the weather seal rails, the little strips that hold the door seals. I hadn't done them on the offside, so on they went. And staying on the offside, the C-pillar, there was an area in it that I had been chasing rust. I hadn't peeled it back far enough, and I gave up when the hole just kept getting bigger and bigger. So I went to tackle that. And I made a little repair section, which went in great. Now I ended up trimming it, as I usually always do, somehow managed to trim a panel just a bit too much. And whereas I should have gone back and just made one new panel, I was too busy being very happy with myself, because patron and friend of the show, a chap called Jer, gifted me his old bench shear, and this thing is just so much fun. And you're listening to a guy who hates loud noises. And the beauty of it is it's quiet. So that's a big deal. But also in terms of metal work, it would almost split a proverbial hair. So I was only too happy to use it to make a little sliver to help us bridge this gap with the welder. And you're looking at these welds, it's really not as pretty as I thought it was going to be, or as good a job as I know I can do now. The welder situation is still in limbo, but there is a kitty sitting there. Thank you to all of the welder patrons. I'll get that in hand ASAP, and we'll get ahead. Now onto the offside. You may or may not remember that as I went through certain areas of this car, certainly with the welding, I said I think I might come back and revisit some of these places. Well, the first thing in the passenger footwell was I didn't cut out nearly enough metal. And on reflection and on further inspection even, I found that there's more floor here that needs to come out. And on top of that, some of these welds, they're just brutal. Underneath the panel, I had tried to save some of this kind of outrigger that extends back from the sill into the floor. But let's do this right, it all needs to come out. And so it does. And if we look at the panel now, you can see just how thin and perforated it is. So with a new piece shaped, roughly shaped, I cleaned up around the floor, and in that went. And I didn't burn holes through rust in a single part of this weld. And if you look at the welds, they're just so much better. We've learned. And yeah, we're still using this gasless MIG, but look, I mean, it can weld a strong, decent weld. Once you know how to handle it and what its limits are. You gotta remember, this welder was 99 euros when it was new. Along the sills, I'd only ever tacked in every second hole that I'd cut in these, and I think I was a bit overzealous. They're every 30 mil or so. Just way too many, I think, especially given they're 8 mil holes. Your average spot weld is what, 2-3 mil? Anyway, this was another job that needed to be tied off. And we go to the driver's footwell. Now, a lot of this weld-wise is fine. But there was something, the moment I did it, that I hated about this, and that was the ridge running down the middle, just almost directly under the brake pedal. I didn't like the look of it, and I knew that if I felt it through the carpet with my heel when I was driving the car, it would be like the Princess and the Pea, and I would be the princess. On top of that, again, in areas here there are terrible wells. So once again, out it comes. And if you see what I mean here, there's a downsweep towards the bottom of the A-pillar, and on this old repair it happens all in one place, whereas if you see the new panel, it's much more progressive. The other thing is, here's some of those wells sitting very tall up above the joint. And if you see towards my thumb, they actually get much flatter. And if we look underneath, we can see that where they're tall, there's very little penetration. But over here where they went flat, there's a lot of penetration, probably too much even. But these would be better wells than the others. So there you go. This had to come out. I couldn't leave it like that. It would have eaten at me. And as I let this in, I'm forming it as I go, using both the hammer and the grinder to shave it, trim it and shape it as I tack it. And the last thing was to tackle a few more tall wells that had run across the floor and redo them. And all of this is just so much better now. Looks better, is more efficient in terms of use of wire, and is a hell of a lot stronger. And that's where we've gotten to. Frankly, it doesn't look like much, but there's a hell of a lot of work in what you've just seen. If I don't bolt panels and doors back on this car in the next episode, you should probably unsubscribe. I would. I am going to stick with this car now until it's done, but I can say for the first time, with some sort of confidence, that we have broken the back of the build. There are only weeks left in it. And yeah, there's some welding left to do. There's even a few bits and pieces that I haven't told you about yet. But I'm confident, I know I can get through them, and hopefully sometime soon we'll be booking a test and then we'll really find out how we got on. Now, the Welder Campaign.
But it was just resting in my account.
We have made the decision. It is done. We are going to close it. I think it's just the time difference between myself and Aaron over in Canada. That means it may well still be there when you see this in the description. If it is, great. If it isn't, thanks anyway. And thank you to all of my welding patrons. There is a new welder on the way. I haven't found a supplier yet, by the way. So if you have any suggestions that way, I'd love to hear them. And thanks again. There's a promo video now available for Soup. The link will be in the description too. Have a look at that, share it with your car club, your forum, your car buddies, anyone who will listen, and let's see what that can do for us. Okay, all that is left is to thank my patrons: Ben Parker, Bones, Chris Clark, Dom Hogan, Dean Van Vuren, Ethan Rode, Edward Cole, Florian Fleischer, Jeff Jones, George Marsonis, Haider Hakim, Ian Clough, Eustace Lezinkas, Matt Dupuy, Michael Assad, Pantelis Fotonopoulos, Shane Christie, Simone Smith and S2KSD. To all of my collaborators, conspirators, contributors, and to everyone who has watched during last year and for this coming year, thank you so much. We are going to get some meaningful stuff done. Until I see you next week with some more on this beastie, do stay stuck in and good luck.